Hey folks, Zach Ostrom here. I'm Insider, Indianapolis Star. It is Christmas Eve. This may be the last Mind Your Banners of 2024. We're not really sure. Mike and I, to let you behind the curtain a little bit, both have some time off we have to burn before the end of the year. Obviously, we're not able to do that during football season because things stayed very interesting all the way through. And so that's what we're going to recap today. But first, Mike, I'm going to hit you with an unexpected one. What's your go-to Christmas Eve move? Like what are you going to be doing tomorrow night once everything settles down on Christmas Eve?
Oh, I don't have a go-to. I mean, no standard. What?
Says it right?
Says right. Oh, if only. So sad.
You should do what I do every Christmas Eve and watch the Muppet Christmas Carol. Let's start because we both, for logistical and technical reasons, we could not do a Mind Your Banners post game on Friday night from Notre Dame Stadium. Forgive us for that. But let's just kind of put a bow on that game specifically before we kind of talk about the bigger picture. I mean, to me, the more I thought about it Saturday, Sunday, the more it did feel like there were some real sort of common through lines between that game and Ohio State, in the sense that Indiana was, at least kind of competitive early. I think the big sort of momentum shift, it's like the Ohio State game shifts on the two special teams touchdowns. This one, it's more like Notre Dame gets that big momentum shift of the interception and the 98-yard run. And then things actually do sort of settle down for a little while. But you sort of feel in both cases like Indiana's sort of punching uphill after that, because you can see a bit of a gap in talent, a bit of a gap, I think, really probably even more so in depth. And once the sort of momentum of the game tilts against Indiana, it is very difficult for the Hoosiers to kind of get it back in any meaningful way. And obviously this game maybe doesn't get, quite as uncompetitive at the end, at least in terms of the final score, as Ohio State, but you do feel like maybe the Hoosiers come away with some of the same lessons.
Yeah, it was a weird game, especially like if you look kind of what the defense did. The obvious miscue or letdown was the 98-yard rushing touchdown, but then you kind of look at the rest of the rushing stats. They're not terrible after that. I mean, Jeremiah Love only finished with 108 yards, so the other 7 carries only had 10. That was their predominantly their production sort of on the ground. Otherwise, they would have been just sort of pretty just average running the ball. There was not a lot of, I think one other breakdown, one other 20-yard run, but at the same time, they really couldn't get off the field. Notre Dame had the ball for 11 more minutes. I think Riley Leonard did sort of just enough. They were obviously 7 of 13 on third down, and that was sort of the difference. But I mean, I felt like the defense did enough to make it a winnable game for the offense. And then the offense, I think, was less of a mixed bag and more sort of like, they got 17 points, but I mean, that came in the final 90 seconds. They didn't hit 200 total yards till that stretch. Just could never get, the run game, obviously, fits and starts, but the passing game really just, for 3 quarters and 10 minutes was sort of non-existent.
I think, we talked a lot this time a year ago, roughly, about the profile of Curt Cignetti's teams at JMU, and in particular those two that kind of came up to the FBS, because you felt like that was, the best sort of look we were going to get at what he and his staff could do at the highest level of college football. And I think the two through lines that really sort of stuck out, that Indiana, that stayed consistent at Indiana, were really, really good quarterback play, anchoring an offense built around passing the ball, not ignoring the run, but certainly an offense that has its greatest success passing the ball, and then a defense that is disruptive to the point of forcing turnovers. Those JMU defenses, a lot of sacks, a lot of tackles for loss, a really high havoc rate, and that led to good turnover numbers. And we saw that basically sort of transposed onto this Indiana team, right? Like, I said this to somebody in the press box at halftime, and Indiana was only down 17-3 at that point. But Indiana's two sort of like superpowers this season were Curtis Rourke and the pass rush, and the ability to really control the line of scrimmage, get teams into second and long, third and long, and then dial up rushes that make quarterbacks make mistakes. The two games Indiana lost this season, the opponent was most successful in taking those two things away. And obviously with Ohio State, I think it was a lot more about the pressure that Ohio State was getting on Curtis Rourke. And then the two special teams touchdowns, kind of being the sort of point when the defense that had been bending but holding finally sort of broke. With Notre Dame, it was a lot more about, forgive me, there's tiny children in my house. With Notre Dame, it felt more like Notre Dame was keeping Curtis Rourke out of rhythm. There was some pressure, but also just, I think, changing coverages. I think that pass defense we knew would be tough. That secondary I thought had a good day. And then the other thing I thought Notre Dame was doing, and Curt Cignetti talked about this postgame, was, primarily through Riley Leonard, but the backs helped too. Notre Dame just kind of kept moving the ball forward. And even if it was only a 2-yard gain or a 3-yard gain, that meant it was 3rd and 4, not 3rd and 7. And so a lot more was open to Notre Dame to be able to stay away from the sort of down and distance situations when Indiana was able, in the games it won, to really dial up pressure this season. My point is, those felt like real sort of, those were like the anchors of Indiana's success to me this season. Quarterback play and the way Indiana was able to control the line of scrimmage and rush the passer and create pressure situations defensively. And the two teams that Indiana lost to, I thought, did a good job in different ways of taking those two strengths away, and Indiana just couldn't get them back.
Well, yeah, you look at some of the numbers. You talk about the third downs, average distance. Indiana was 8.3, and six of their attempts were 9 yards or more. That's not a recipe for winning football. Indiana only averaged 2.1 yards on first down. So you can kind of see they were sort of putting themselves in bad situations, throughout the game on offense. And, I thought that was interesting after the game. Curtis Rourke, I don't know, I felt like he kind of admitted that he really never got in a rhythm after that interception. It took him a long time to sort of, find his footing. And I think you mentioned this on the way back, like what would have been, even if you end up with a field goal there, or you just don't turn over, you don't have that sequence of turnover right at the 2-yard line and then 98-yard run. What's the complexion of this game? Is it just a tie game at halftime and kind of things reset? Is Indiana sort of in a better place? It just felt like the Ohio State game where there was just one stretch where the game kind of turned, and Indiana, like you said, was kind of playing catch up, kind of behind the 8 ball the rest of the time.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute and my browser was moving slowly there. I think, I tried to ask Mike Shanahan this because I think you're right about Rourke. And listen, Notre Dame got some pressure. It wasn't like Ohio State, though, where, it was just like Ohio State was unloading on every snap. And, of course, after the fact, Curt Cignetti kind of talks about the silent snap count and the crowd noise and all that. I sort of tried to get it out of Mike Shanahan, and I didn't really expect him to answer, but I asked him anyway. Like in a game like that, where's the balance when you clearly have a quarterback who's not in rhythm? And Rourke wasn't. And actually, like, there was a point he only completed one of his first 6 passes. And then from there, he was okay in terms of just like basic completion percentage. It was that he was missing throws we've seen him make, at times this season. He was missing in crucial down and distance situations. He would hit. It was, instead of like hitting 3 or 4 in a row, he'd hit one and then miss one, or he'd hit 2 and then miss one. And I asked Shanahan, like, what's the balance you strike basically when your quarterback is clearly not in rhythm? And Indiana's had a good formula for getting Rourke in rhythm this season. When you think about the way that Indiana's kind of layered in the RPO game, some of the one read throws that we've talked about to his slot receivers and things. What's the balance between sort of sticking with what got you there and just saying, hey, listen, if we stay with this, eventually it'll work, and recognizing that it's not working and trying something different, within the flow of the game, when obviously that's not the easiest thing in the world to just sort of like pivot. But I think it's an interesting, I think, sort of thought exercise for Cignetti and Shanahan as much as anybody, just moving forward, in the sense that, the one thing it is worth saying Curt Cignetti had never really seen as a head coach was that level of competition, like the top end of the FBS, teams competing to win Power 4 conferences, teams competing for, places in the playoff. Now, now you've got, I think throughout his career, it seems like Curt Cignetti has a pretty good track record for learning both from success and failure. I think it would just be kind of an interesting thought exercise for him and Shanahan as they move into the offseason to sort of ask themselves, how do we stay, kind of one step ahead in those sorts of environments? Because they'll get them again. Indiana's at Oregon next year. It's at Penn State next year. It's at Iowa next year. In terms of keeping the quarterback comfortable, and then if for some reason it's not working, getting him there against really good defenses or in really difficult environments.
Yeah, I thought, Brian Haynes was sort of honest, I thought, after the game, and interesting what he said too about that he regretted sort of almost instantly, like right after the game, about maybe not being more aggressive at times. I mentioned that specifically about the 98-yard run on third downs. And you talk about kind of the talent gap, which Curt Cignetti was honest about, that, they're skilled players, and some of the guys on defense and up front just a little bigger, stronger, faster. But in that, knowing that, Haynes was sort of worried about being too overly aggressive, but then maybe sort of talked himself out of doing some stuff they normally do, which I thought was surprising, because I think it kind of, maybe on both sides of the ball, that there was a little that, I think fans were sort of dismayed that Cignetti punted, what was it, with 10:40 something to go. But I understood what his point was after the game, that the offense was playing so bad that he felt maybe that the defense could give you sort of a havoc play and change the complexion of something like a turnover. But what do you sort of think of that part of the discussion, that Indiana, specifically Curt Cignetti with the punt, some of the punting, punted twice at midfield. The dominance in the first half were good, but
the one that I think everyone centered on, I said too, I said it on Twitter at the time, I don't really understand why Indiana's punting here. I do think it is fair to recognize, like, fans want to believe that coaches will always have a solution, that like, if you just work a little harder or try a little more, that there is a solution to the problem. Sometimes there isn't. And especially in the moment like that, you don't actually have that much time, between drives to make adjustments. You can't just like open whole new chapters of a playbook without ever having worked on them in practice and things. I think that was, I think Curt Cignetti was justified there in saying, listen, if we were playing the percentages, there wasn't a dramatically good chance of converting 3rd and 10 based on the way things were going offensively. And I don't think necessarily, because I know some people have criticized Cignetti for maybe the way he coached in this game compared to some of his bravado across the course of the season. And I kind of get that. Like, I understand where that comes from. I don't know that I agree with all of it, but I understand where it comes from. But if you're Cignetti, that there is an extent to which you have to boil it down to a math problem. And you have to have some faith in your defense, which has been so good this season, to basically say, I think there were still about 11 and a half minutes left, something like that. And if you punt there and you get a quick 3 and out, then you probably get the ball back with about 9.5 minutes left. And then, in an ideal world, you get a fresh set of downs right around where you were at 3rd and 10. And you just kind of try to go again. I understand his point. I don't know. I don't know that I agree unequivocally with the decision, but I understand his point. And certainly as someone who does, fairly often bang the drum for the idea that sometimes there just isn't a solution and you have to accept that. You have to just kind of live with the fact that sometimes you just can't win in a certain situation. I understood what he was saying. And I think it did tie more broadly because there was, and I understand where this comes from too. There was a wider sort of, Indiana's coach talked all this big game and then Indiana fell flat on its face. But in fairness to Cignetti, I thought in both losses, he got up and just kind of said, hey, listen, I got out coached. We got outplayed. We got to be better. We'll learn from this. We're still a good team, but I'm not going to sit up here and try to force feed some dumb narrative to you. I thought he took it as well as he gave it, is my point. And
yeah, I think
in a moment like that, that's a coach just sort of saying, hey, listen, I'm as confident as anybody. I'm as brave as anybody. But sometimes discretion is the better part of valor.
Well, I mean, it looks worse in the fact that, Notre Dame had a 6-minute drive after that and obviously scored again. So, I mean, the decision did not necessarily work out as he laid it out. I understood it. And, I get that people criticize him because I think he's fine with it, that some of the performative stuff, obviously people are going to be quick to criticize, but he's working on a different level here. He's trying to build a brand, speak to his fan base. I don't think his audience is sort of the national people that go, oh, you should have been more, you really didn't kind of live up to that talk. That's not really who he's playing to. I think that he would regret not in that. You could second guess that punt, and I'm fine with that. I think you could second guess some of the punts in the first half too. I just thought he didn't take enough chances ultimately with the way the game was going to sort of try to shake things up because maybe it gets worse, but at the same time you weren't in it, right? So does he regret not going for it just because you had to do something, right? At some point just kind of it felt like you were folding when that's not something you've done all year. And so that was sort of, I don't know if it was in that spot, but I just felt like they didn't take enough chances throughout the game based on how Notre Dame just had a stranglehold for that, essentially 45 minutes.
Well, and I thought, I said this to you, and I know you didn't quite agree at the same level, but I thought Notre Dame just made, I don't say all the plays, but where Indiana was missing a key tackle or, just not quite getting a pass rush home, or Curtis Rourke was, he overthrows Miles Cross by maybe 8 to 10 inches on that little sort of that little fade route to the sideline. Notre Dame was making some tough grabs, not impossible catches, but getting it up off the turf, or keeping a play alive long enough to get a throw that either gets a first down or maybe sets up 3rd and 1 instead of 3rd and 6.
I thought the missed tackles were more sort of the definition of, I didn't come out of the game and been like, man, Notre Dame's wide receivers really ate up.
No. That's why I'm saying I think it's small things. It was it was an adding up of a lot of small moments where you felt like Notre Dame was just consistently getting that, that making that play that if you were sitting in a room full of Indiana fans, it would have just been like this big groan that sort of, just sort of like exhaled over and over and over again. Not big plays, just small ones. But that's again, I think I don't know if you're a coach and you see that, you sort of think like, not like, oh, it's just not our day, but that affects how aggressive you want to be, and how much you want to risk certain things. I don't know.
That goes to Ryan Haynes' point. I think that he let them dictate what he did, right? Like, and so like he got out of what philosophically he wanted to kind of come into the game and do, and I think he regrets that. Like he regret. It sounded like, or I mean, just with the way he was talking about it, that he felt like, you can't do that, right? Like you can't let those things get in your head and kind of get away from what you wanted to do. At least all the time. You could make some concessions to the fact that, you're not playing well or Notre Dame's maybe a little faster. But at the same time, you have to have some sort of – they just weren't very, aggressive, I thought, on either side of the ball. And so
I guess my point is more that I just felt Notre Dame was putting them in situations where consistently Notre Dame was sort of dampening their aggression or their ability to be aggressive, because Notre Dame kept making the small play that added up that didn't allow Indiana to, pin back their ears on 3rd and 9 because it was 3rd and 3 or 3rd and 2. I mean, I thought
you can still be aggressive, but the whole point is like you. Okay, so you have.
Then you're walking a real line between aggressive and reckless.
But sometimes you got to get a little reckless when nothing's working, right? I mean,
you could say that, but like Josh Heupel might disagree after Saturday night. We'll talk about that in a minute. I want to just kind of give you the last word on this season, and I don't expect you to sum it up, the last 12 months all in like 30 seconds, but just like, how do you sort of define Indiana's wider accomplishment this season? Like, what do you think this eventually means for this program?
Well, I mean, who knows what it means in the long run? I mean, we got to see what sort of he has in store, the next couple of years. I mean, in the moment, it still feels like, an incredible achievement. I mean, it's the biggest turnaround, obviously, in the FBS this year. The best single season, I think, in Indiana history, and it's not very close, maybe, like just what they were able to do. And, I don't think that they were able to sort of celebrate that just because they were so focused on obviously trying to, get through the playoffs, and that's just how Cignetti's built. But I do think now, sort of the next couple of months, there will be a sort of an appreciation, I think, of this team, especially from, local fans, here in Bloomington, just about what to say. I mean, like, look, they looked utterly dominant in 10 out of the 12 games they played in the regular season. Didn't match up great against Ohio State and Notre Dame, but I mean, not many teams did this year, right? So, I mean, like, I don't know. You're not in the sort of top class yet, right? In general, just because I think you have to do more than 1 year. But I think Cignetti showed a path forward for how to make Indiana football a thing. And that's all you could ask for in year one.
How important do you think, and I'm not making it out like Indiana, like it's somehow saving the conference, but how important do you think Indiana was to the Big Ten this year? Just because we talked so much about like how the middle, like the Big Ten and the SEC were two kind of like mirror opposites, where the SEC had this like this middle to upper middle class that was just sort of slugging it out all year, whereas the Big Ten was kind of these 4 teams way out ahead of the field. And it just like, I sort of wonder, like, if Indiana doesn't sort of pull up to that playoff level, I don't know that I don't want to boil this down to like this this never ending war between the SEC and the Big Ten. but I do feel like the Big Ten sort of won the argument this year, in the first year of these massive super conferences. And Indiana was kind of the reason why, because Indiana was the one more team, if that makes sense, compared to the SEC that just kind of had a lot of teams that just kind of couldn't, in the end, could not clear those last hurdles. And I do want to talk about the national discourse a little bit, if for no reason other than because, we'll do it in a minute, but just because it's kind of hard to escape. But like, you talk about how dominant Indiana was. Like, Indiana consistently didn't just beat all the teams it was supposed to, but it never left any doubt. And it just kind of like I was at the Big Ten championship game, and it was just kind of striking me like Tony Petitti literally didn't even say anything when he handed the trophy over to Dan Lanning. It was almost like he was just saying, like, what do you need me to say about my conference? It's been like on a night when Kirby Smart and Greg Sankey are engaging in a staring contest on the stage down in Atlanta, Tony Petitti's just like, yep, we got, we're gonna.
I don't know that that's. I don't think that makes much sense. Because Indiana's been used sort of as the reason why the Big Ten Conference is bad. I feel like nationally, they're placed in the picture.
Would you say nationally, or would you say regionally?
No, I think both. I guess. I mean, outside of Bloomington, Indiana has not been used just to like prop up the Big Ten. I think it's been the exact opposite, and that ties into the national discourse coming out of the game too. Like, I think Indiana's been used as sort of not like a, hey, look, this is the Big Ten's got all these 4 teams, and all 4 have looked good. It's that, hey, look, Indiana skated by. And the Big Ten doesn't deserve.
Let's get into this, because Hooperazzi says, "Where's the Big Ten commissioner? Where's the Big Ten media?" First of all, like, if you can't find the Big Ten media defending Indiana, I'm thinking Kings of the North. I'm thinking, regional media, if you want to call it, like regional national media that were at the Notre Dame game. I'm talking about, like, basically, I think that what's happening here is you're only hearing the people that are outraging you if you were an Indiana fan, because there are plenty of people out there in the media defending Indiana, and not just locally, but like around the Big Ten. Now, there is sort of a, and Hooperazzi says here, Tony Petitti was an IA. Tony Petitti does not talk. Like, he does not do it. That is his approach, is like the product will speak for itself. Like I said, he literally got up on stage in Indianapolis, handed Dan Lanning the trophy without making a single remark, and then got off. That is his approach. And you can agree with it or disagree with it, but that's not an Indiana specific thing. That's not Tony Petitti doesn't want to defend Indiana. It's Tony Petitti does not grandstand in public. He just doesn't. And I understand why Indiana fans feel some grievance at the discourse coming out of certain sections of the media, particularly SEC bending sections of the media. But I would encourage them to go look at how many people are making fun of those opinions, and how many people are justifiably pointing out how bad faith a lot of those arguments are, how ridiculous a lot of those arguments are, when, for example, people are saying things like the committee shouldn't get caught up in wins, which is just like just an absurd sentence to allow to come out of your mouth if you are a sort of an opinion maker in college, in any sport. Like, what team sport in America does not weigh wins?
But I think there is room. I mean, look, the arguments that are being made now are just bad. I mean, is there room for nuance? Like, I think there is. Like, I think maybe the ultimate point is like, does 11-1 and 9-3 is the gap? Like, should the gap be closer because the 9 really does, like, the quality of the 9 matters more than the actual number? Might be the more nuanced argument. Not like wins don't matter. Like, I think there should be, Indiana should absolutely get points for their style of victories, their number of victories, just how dominant they look throughout the season. But at the same time, like I could understand saying, maybe a team that was 9-3 had a better, overall schedule, might be the better team, and those things will get debated in the future. But I don't think that there was an overwhelming argument for some of the teams that were below Indiana that Indiana should just have not been in the field. Like
it is a perfectly valid opinion, and in fact, one I agree with, that Tennessee with 10 wins should have been ranked ahead of Indiana with 11, and Ohio State with 10 wins should have been ranked ahead of Indiana with 11. Like I agreed with both of those rankings. It's a valid opinion I disagree with that, and I think that the team that everybody kind of seized onto was 9-win Alabama. There was actually a little bit of noise, in fairness, for South Carolina, but I think Alabama was the big one. That 9-win Alabama should have been ahead of Indiana. But I think that the problem is the argument becomes bad faith when you do things like ignore Tennessee, when we literally have a direct comparison point between Indiana and Tennessee. They both played Ohio State late in the season at Ohio Stadium, and neither team performed particularly well. But by the most fundamental measures, Indiana was more competitive in that game. It was 7-7 near the end of the first half, and it was a basic mistake in special teams that gave Ohio State the lead going into halftime, whereas you didn't even have your TV turned on Saturday night before Tennessee was down 21-0, and it was never really a game again. And the problem with that is if you ignore that, that means you're also ignoring a data point that actually harms Alabama's case, because Tennessee beat Alabama. And so you're saying a team that lost to a team that then went on the road. And I think in fairness, in general, I tweeted this on Saturday night. In general, I think a number of us, and I'm absolutely guilty of this, somehow decided these road games were less difficult than regular season road games, that we decided like these campus sites were really cool, but somehow like it was going to be easier to go on the road in the playoff than it would have been in the regular season. And I think all of these games proved it was still going to be really, really difficult to go on the road. But the problem is when you ignore Tennessee and Tennessee's performance, as some people, Paul Feinbaum, have done, you're not just ignoring like a direct comparison point to Indiana. And there has been kind of a bizarre amount of like Indiana specifically, not just like Indiana and SMU, but Indiana specifically. And I think that's where I understand why Indiana fans feel kind of very defensive, is kind of this idea that it seems like Indiana's being held up this way more so than SMU.
Well, I mean, but that's just the byproduct, I feel like, mostly of their placement on the schedule in terms of having Friday night by themselves.
Yes, yeah. 100%, and just 100%, and not Saturday, not the first game Saturday too.
By the time Indiana scored those 2 touchdowns, most people had turned the TV off and were like, they got killed. Then you have the one game all night till the morning, and SMU is the first game of 3, and so by the time they got destroyed, that was the and
it overlapped with an NFL game.
Yeah, I mean, long.
Like you can just move on with your weekend. My point is just it is the bad faith of the argument, because like Bud Elliott from CBS, I forget who he was retweeting. Maybe it was Kirk Herbstreit. I don't remember. But one of the sort of talking head opinions that Indiana didn't deserve to be in the field. And he just took the basic numbers from Indiana, Notre Dame, their passing numbers, their rushing numbers, and their total points, and the same numbers for Alabama at Oklahoma. And Indiana like significantly outperformed Alabama in those 2 games. And I understand those aren't perfect comparison points. And yes, Indiana scored a couple of garbage time touchdowns. But the point he was making is you're arguing for a team with 2 fewer wins and substantially worse losses when you can't even hold up Indiana's performance in the playoff as somehow worse than Alabama's performance against a far worse Oklahoma team in the regular season. So why does Alabama deserve to be in the playoff over Indiana? And then the thing that should be sort of holding Alabama up, which is Tennessee's inclusion, and the fact that Tennessee's a good loss, quote unquote, and Alabama's got some good wins. They beat Georgia, and you can accept some of their losses because look, Tennessee's a good team. They're in the playoff. Tennessee goes and plays the only common opponent it has with Indiana in the same stadium, same general environment, and performs worse. And so it becomes kind of a bad faith thing. And I think, listen, I don't want to see the playoff expanded again. I know it's going to be. I think what this weekend proved is that maybe there are times when we don't need 12, but TV rules everything for better or worse, often worse. And so that's where we are. So I put this up from Hooperazzi, which says, IU should have been playing SMU Arizona State. I think the easiest fix to this is to get rid of the automatic buys. You can have automatic berths. You can say the top 5 conferences each get an automatic berth, but you don't get an automatic buy. And that way you do wind up in a situation where, like, Notre Dame is a lot closer to getting a bye. You wind up in a situation where ideally the teams in the first round are a little bit more closely matched. So, but that's
but I mean, just the sweeping generalizations about the everybody wanted this, and then they're like, well, it wasn't great, and so it's bizarre, and like it's the first year of it. The games weren't competitive, but I mean, I think that there's been just a lot of tweeting about how uncompetitive a lot of these games have been, sort of going back through the 4-team playoff, and so the short memory, I think some of the grandstanding has been a little much with the Indiana of it all, especially for people that sort of didn't have that view or didn't express the opinion. There was one particular media figure that has been very out in front of this who had Cignetti on his set and wasn't saying these things. I would have loved to hear if he had said, Indiana didn't deserve it with him sitting right across from him. That would have been an interesting discussion. And to now be like, no, I knew it all along. It's like that's sort of, I think, the been pretty ugly and for bizarre. Like in terms of like
that's where it feels like it becomes bad faith. Like where
Yeah.
it feels like you're not arguing in good faith. You're not trying to make salient points. You're just trying to push, whether it's your personal opinion or it's some wider agenda, whatever it is. And I'm not accusing anyone of anything because we don't need to go down that rabbit hole today. Like it makes it hard to believe that you're arguing in good faith. And if you're not arguing in good faith, then, why should, for example, Indiana fans, much less Curt Cignetti, sit down at the table and argue with you? I want to wrap it up here because if nothing else, I think there's a decent chance we hear about Fernando Mendoza's decision sometime today. Where Indiana goes from here, I just kind of want to just kind of talk about just the and we don't have to dig position by position through the roster. We have seen them address, that they've added a defensive tackle. I think they're probably kind of, at least in terms of numbers, I think they're probably good there. They've reinforced at tight end. We're starting to see some players kind of come out and say they're coming back. Aiden Fisher's back. Mike Paycheck, who's Indiana's director of like sort of player development, things like that. He's been around the program for a long time. Sent out a tweet seeming to suggest Elijah Surratt is probably
No,
back.
don't do that. No, we're not doing that. No.
What?
We don't read the tea leaves like that. He
tweeted
could have said their Waffle House. Indiana could be Waffle. He could just like Waffle House.
The tea on your head.
No. Cut his mic.
Would you say that's nonsense?
We don't have a producer. Cut his mic.
Anyway, quarterback's the big one. Obviously, there are some player retentions Indiana's going to have to make sure. I think you and I talked about, like, Fisher, Surratt, Carter Smith, Pons, Mikel Kamara's decision is obviously a really big one. Whether he stays or goes, we don't know yet. But just kind of like, basically, how close to a competitive team do you think Indiana is right now?
Ask me when they have a quarterback, right? I mean, I think that's the first domino. Well, okay, so you talked about those six. They get Fisher. Fisher's already back. He's already said he's back. Uh, I don't think Kamara said that. He just said he's
He sent out
thinking.
like an emoji that was like, "Ooh." So I
But
think
he could have been thinking about what he was going to have for lunch. So we don't read the tea leaves like that. Kamara hasn't said anything. But that's that core group that you listed, I think, is the top sort of um, uh, must have back to sort of run this back, as Aiden Fisher said, to sort of be competitive, to be in that maybe 9-win area. You got to have that group. You got to get a quarterback. But then I think there are some positions here. I think you're going to probably need another offensive tackle. Whether you can upgrade any other part of the offensive line, I don't know. You're going to need a running back. Roman, was it Hemby from Maryland? Obviously, was on campus on Saturday. He would probably be a pretty good get. And then you have some other work to do. If Kamara leaves, I think pass rusher becomes like maybe the 1B need behind quarterback. I do think there's some gaps to fill here. And I think Cignetti was right in the fact that he took a week off from doing the official visits. The leading into the game, they did get penalized. These playoff teams did, from timing to try to make it all work. So I do think they have a little more of an uphill climb here to try to figure out some of the holes on the roster. But it starts with quarterback. If Mendoza comes in, it's a little easier to see sort of the path and sort of where they're going.
Huberazzi said this. I just want to be clear. He did not, that I'm aware of. I'm looking at his Twitter right now. He tweeted out the chin scratching emoji, and then someone tweeted back and said, "Starting a GoFundMe now," and he tweeted back 2 eyes crying emojis. So if that's more like that's not tea leaves. That's like planting the tea plant seeds in the ground and staring at the little mound of dirt and wondering what the leaves will say when they come up. I don't think Kamara's back. I think, or at least I don't think he's decided. If he has, he's not made it public. The quarterback is the big one. I still think, and I'm fascinated by this, and so far it seems to be going well for Indiana. We've talked a lot. I've written some.
We should mention they're going to have to redo much of their quarterback room too. Taven already entered the portal. He was the only scholarship player after the season so far that's entered. So they might be. Market for a second, depending on what happens.
But I think these next few days are kind of a fascinating test to me of how far Indiana's come in NIL. And the reason I say that is because if you can keep a lot of these guys, Fisher, Surratt, Pons, Carter Smith, like guys that play priority positions that if this were an NFL roster, they'd be getting paid significant money, cornerback, number one corner, middle linebacker, leading tackler, left tackle, whatever. If you can keep those guys without any real sort of I'm going to go in the portal and kind of see what offers I can get, maybe I'll come back, then that's where I think Indiana, maybe you start to wonder, is this NIL situation robust enough for this to be competitive, especially as we move into revenue sharing, when maybe the NIL numbers just get a little bit more under control. I don't think anybody thinks they're suddenly just going to all flatten out, but it becomes just a little bit less inflated. That's what I'm interested in. And I think just to give people a sense for the timing on all this, today began a dead period that will go through the new year. And then there will be a brief window for visitors again in January. But as Curt Cignetti pointed out Friday night, a lot of the guys, a lot of the best transfers will be off the board by then. There will be, some bits and bobs of players that enter after bowl games, sometime between now and the new year. But a lot of the ones you're going to want to target are already in the portal. I think one area where, and we're talking at just after 11 a.m. on Monday, and there's every chance by there's every chance that by the time you listen to this, we'll know one way or another Fernando Mendoza's decision. It does seem like I think it's coming today, like sometime Monday, the 23rd. Like the one position that I don't think anybody's talked a lot about that was actually very important for Indiana this year is slot receiver. And they took 3 in the portal last year. And in each in his own way, they all wound up being pretty important. Miles Price, Keyshawn Williams, Miles Cross. Cross less catches, but became, I think, a really, really important blocker for Indiana in some of the sort of gap schemes that it was trying to run. Sort of it through its zone run game. That's the one area where like we haven't seen Indiana add anything, and I haven't even really seen a lot in the way of links to players visiting and things like that. And I know there have been some players that have I think been able to kind of get through campus quietly without a lot of fanfare, but it just in general, like that's kind of the one spot where it feels like Indiana's still got to add at least one major, unless behind the scenes, some young guy has just impressed the staff. We don't know about it because we don't get to watch practice, and time will sort of bear out that Charlie Becker or whoever is the next great slot receiver for Indiana. I just think that's the one area where the one position where I have not seen a lot of, sort of hard and fast links in the transfer portal that I think Indiana probably still needs to fill.
Well, they had 7. He said they had 7 people on campus, and 2 were known, 1 canceled. So I mean, there were 4 others, and maybe they were all slot receivers. Who knows? Because I think the same could be said for. There was 1 offensive tackle that we had gotten out that had visited. He has since committed elsewhere. But I think that's the same sort of spot where you haven't seen a lot of connections. I think they're trying to. I'd wondered if they're telling kids like not to publicize offers from them, just because so little has gotten out about kind of who they've targeted. I don't know that for a fact, but it just seems like that way because they have been kind of playing things close to the vest. But also, I mean, you figure the quarterback, once the quarterback domino falls in terms of trying to get guys on offense, it's a lot easier to pitch if you say get a Mendoza and Hemby, like you say, look, this is our core, this is what we're, and you have Surratt, like that, that's who you're coming, to play with. And so I think those sort of recruiting conversations probably become a lot easier when you have your quarterback, right? You can say, this is who's going to be throwing it to you.
We'll see. It's going to be a fascinating offseason for Indiana. They pretty often are. We'll leave it there for now. Thank you all so much this season. We're not going to talk basketball today. There's a lot more football to talk about right now than basketball, and there's a lot more time to talk about basketball, certainly as we enter 2025. Thank you all so much for joining us this season.
Well, I thought you were going to give your three top moments from the Chattanooga game.
Well, here's the. Do you want to finish up with looking back at our bold predictions?
For the year?
Yeah.
For what? Mine were Curtis Rourke would break both the single season yards record and touchdown record. He did break the single season touchdown record with that last touchdown. He got to 29. So that's the single season record. He didn't get the yards record. What was the
record? So we'll give you like 1.5 there.
But he also became fourth ever with 3,000 yards.
Yeah.
So he did. He made. I mean, he had. I'm trying to get all these numbers up real quick. So, who had probably the best single season? Was it Sudfeld? Had the 3,500 in 2015. Was that probably the best season for a quarterback in program history before this?
Yeah.
I mean, it was up there, right? I mean, he finished 1 yard off top 3. Kellen Lewis.
Like I said, one of 4, 3. I mean, I was a little more vague than you. I just said he would have statistically one of the best seasons in program history, and I kind of just left it open. Like I think he will set at least, a couple of these single season records, and he set the single season record for completion percentage and the single season record for touchdowns. So, I mean, it is one of the best in the, without a doubt, in program history. I predicted Indiana. Okay, please leave. Thank you. We have a very
I
silly.
think he said he loves you.
I know. His friends are
and then
over.
my second one
I
was
think someone is just showing off. I had Indiana has a top
my-
5 offense in the Big Ten. Got that. Mikel Kamara first double-digit sack. Hoosier since Jamie Curlew. Got that. And 9 Indiana, which ultimately was too conservative.
So I did the records with Rourke, which were sort of, push, basically, I would say. I said multiple 1,000-yard receivers, which was wrong, but Surratt was 43 yards away. And if you combine Keyshawn Williams and
Cut his
Miles
mic.
Price into one person,
Cut his mic.
it's pretty close.
Cut his mic.
It's pretty close.
Cut his mic.
Oh, it's pretty close. And then the last one was that they would make a bowl game and win a bowl game. Obviously, they hit a little higher. But it is a bummer that they didn't get their chance to sort of have a victory lap because it was very businesslike, obviously, with the playoff. Not a good chance for the fans to sort of celebrate the team, which I think a bowl game gives you. But the first round did not. And the bowl streak still exists, correct? Are we are in agreement, right? Their bowl losing streak still exists.
Yeah, no, you don't.
Even if they had won this would not have counted as a bowl.
No. Bowls are bowls. You got to win a bowl in that streak. Uberazzi says way too early predictions for 2025. Number 1, I think the roster's got to form more fully before I'm ready for that. Number 2, quite frankly, there's chaos in my house right now, and I need to go. So he's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman. Thank you all so much for joining us today, for joining us all season. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas. If we don't talk to you before then, Happy New Year. We may get something together around the Winthrop game, or at least I may. We'll see. But for now, for the Indianapolis Star, for the Bloomington Herald Times, thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you soon.